introduce Martina Schubert, who will chair the first session. Martina is Deputy Director of the Vienna School of International Studies. She has worked for many years in Brussels, among others, as Deputy Head of Cabinet of the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, as Member of Cabinet responsible for international issues in the Cabinet of Energy Commissioner Andris Piebalgs, and as Presidency Coordinator of the Austrian Presidency of the Council of the European Union in 2018. Prior to her current role, Martina Schubert was also a Deputy Head of Austria to NATO. Martina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pierre Bruno. Good morning, everybody in the room and also online, and welcome also to our speakers of this first session. I'm very happy and thankful to be the chair of this important first session of the workshop today. It is an essential topic that is very close to my heart. And as you have heard, I am a diplomat from my background. Now I'm working in the academic field as a deputy director of a very known institution, the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna School of International Studies. And in, of course, also our academic programs, we attach importance to this topic, science diplomacy. In fact, we have launched a new master program this academic year, Digital International Affairs. And the aim was, in fact, to combine these new technologies and area of digital with the classical, I would say, academic topics of international affairs, because we see this need of dialogue between the two areas, digital and international affairs. And in general, the science diplomacy has been following or be part of my work now. The last 3 years, I have been also the co-chair of one of the working groups that has prepared work and recommendations for the European framework on science diplomacy. And that has been, these recommendations were published just recently by the Commission, and I must say I'm very happy about the outcome of also yesterday's ministerial conference here in UNESCO. And I would like to really thank the organizers, UNESCO, and also Pierre Bruno from Avris, to continue to put this on the agenda of diplomats, of scientists, and today this is really the fantastic occasion to bring together such a distinguished panel I'm honored to chair. So what I would suggest from this 1.5 hours that we have is to pass the floor first to the speakers for approximately 10 minutes to each of them, to explain and to go into, let's say, more information about the needs they see in science diplomacy in their institutions from their background. They have very diverse backgrounds. They're also very from different regions, so that's great that we have such a fantastic panel covering different geographic areas, different institutions. And then we might exchange also between us, and then of course we will open the floor for questions from you and also from the online questions that we will have received. So we will go, I would say, chronologically, like it is also in our program. So our first speaker will be Mrs. Peggy Oti-Boateng, the Executive Director from the African Academy of Science. I will introduce you shortly. Dr. Oti-Boateng is a seasoned leader in science, technology, and innovation with over 40 years of experience. Currently, as I said, she's the Executive Director of the African Academy of Science, but previously she has also had influential roles here at UNESCO, where she spearheaded initiatives like the UNESCO recommendation on open science. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science and WMO Research Board. Her career is marked by a strong focus on Africa, driving science, technology, and innovation policies and capacity building for sustainable development. She has led numerous high-impact projects such as the EU-African Union AAS ARISE program and AAS US National Institute of Health Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation African Postdoctoral Training Initiative, among others. She was the first chairperson of the Bio-Innovative Africa Program Advisory Committee and served consequently for 5 years from 2017 to 2022. With a background in research and academia, she brings a holistic approach to addressing Africa's challenges through science. She has an extensive experience in policymaking, coupled with her deep understanding of research and innovations, and positions her as a key figure in shaping Africa's scientific landscape. So we are really honored to have you here on board with us today and to hear from your experience about the training needs that you see in the area of science diplomacy in your institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those kind words. And it's a pleasure to be back here, and I see all my colleagues here. And thank you for the opportunity. And I have my colleagues here from Africa who are also here, can complement. When we say in Africa, you're talking about 50 plus countries, and there's diversity from the north, south, east, west, and even in terms of science diplomacy, some are way ahead, like South Africa. Some are not there yet. And for us, I think the opportunity for science diplomacy is more urgent now than ever before. I mean, the geopolitics in Africa, we need to have those two frameworks of science impacting diplomacy and diplomacy also impacting science. So that gives us, a wide range of how I would like to see the science diplomacy. I must say that Europe is far ahead with science diplomacy, and even from the literature, we're now all, getting used to what this really is. But I think it's a very important tool, and if used properly by scientists and diplomats, there's so much that we can do, particularly for us in Africa in conflict resolution, in the use of natural resources, because all the extraction, the disruptions that are happening, I think if we harness the potential of science diplomacy as a tool, we'll go far with it. Just to come home in with the African Academy of Sciences, we are non-aligned, non-profit, institution in Africa, and this year we celebrate 40 years of making science work for sustainable development in Africa. Our activities are engaged in science diplomacy through various initiatives aimed at fostering collaboration and addressing global challenges. While specific details on science diplomacy training may be limited, the African Academy of Sciences involvement in international workshops and partnerships highlights its commitment to science diplomacy. And we do this not alone, but we do this in partnership. For example, we're a member of the International Science Council, which pursues science, trust in science. We're also a member of the International Academy partnerships, and some of our colleagues are here. And again, we work through this, organizations to facilitate collaboration among academics. We also collaborate with non-government organizations. AAS collaborates with NGOs and other non-state actors to promote science diplomacy. These collaborations provide a platform for exchange and address critical issues such as societal responsibility of scientists. And a good example, which I'll give it, recently in collaboration with EU, we organized one of the first meetings on science diplomacy, Diplomacy Symposium on Transboundary Nile River Management. This, has been ongoing for a very long time, where over 10 countries share the same river basin. So others use it for hydroelectricity, others need it for food security, others also need it for trade, So how do we ensure that, everybody, along the Nile River benefits from there? So we created a platform for Nile River Basin countries and brought in, looking at science, using science to solve, some of those problems. We also brought in partners from Europe. How do they use the Danube River? So that we can also share, experiences. And again, how can we scientists develop those data? We also need data to inform the policy. For example, data on how much river flows when a country like Ethiopia decides to have, the hydroelectricity on it. How would it affect, food security in Sudan? So we brought experts who are fellows of the academy, looking at it from different perspectives. And for us, we're proud that we've been able to come up with a recommendation on regulations and international cooperation of the river, which call for establishment of Nile River Science Academy Network, a scientific legal subcommittee, and a recurring science and technology conference to ensure collaboration, technical guidance, research, market incentives, and it came out with several, recommendations. So I'd encourage you. It's online. It's also on EU online. It's also, so this is practical ways of using science diplomacy, for conflict resolution. But we also have other programs, where, we're using a science diplomacy. For example, the training of our postdoctoral. We have a lot of Africans, they do the doctoral, and they need laboratories to work with. So we have this partnership with the National Institute of Health, where we have, our postdoctoral, working with them. But they come up with, innovations that can also be used, by Africa, also by the US. But one of the critical areas is also, how do you use this data, in terms of, equitable partnership, because a lot of the data that is developed, generated in Africa is not used by Africa. So how do we make sure that we, Africa also has the opportunity, to use this? And we have this model, but all I'm saying that there are different levels of the science diplomacy, how we understand it, the framework in Africa. It's a very important area that where we can harness in Africa. And then we have the ARISE program, which thanks to EU funding, which really demonstrates, we also need innovations. We need innovations in Africa to be able to articulate, solving our challenges like climate change. Another area that we're looking for is climate financing. The other issue is also financing. There's so much funding out there, but we don't get access to it. How can we use science diplomacy to access some of these funding? Those are some of the areas that we're also looking at. And then the last but not the least is, how do we get our diplomats to know about science diplomacy? A lot of the African countries, and we're going to have, hopefully have a meeting of training African diplomats in science diplomacy, using scientific evidence in making decisions. Because a lot of African countries don't even have science attaches. Maybe, others have. But we don't have science attaches in many of our, our embassies. So that also creates, another problem. How do they use science? How do all these dynamics, how do we use them? So there's a whole lot of opportunity pursuing this science diplomacy framework. And I'm proud that the African Union in the next 10 years has anchored science diplomacy as one of the tools to use for sustainable development of Africa. So I encourage you all to also read the science technology, we call it TISA 2034. And people who developed it are in this room, in the UNESCO, AAS, a government of South Africa came together and found out that science diplomacy is very, very key. So we encourage and so again, we need to train, we need to train scientists, we need to train diplomats, we need to train mid-career scientists in science diplomacy, because now we know that with science diplomacy, we can impact, we can impact science, and then also with diplomacy, they can impact the other way around. So thank you very much. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oti Boateng, for this overview and the activities that you are chairing and also following, and the need, I think, that is mirrored that also in Africa, like we have here in Europe, a need for more training also of diplomats in science diplomacy. I will turn now to our second speaker, who is Sakri Abdul Hamid. Professor Sakri is the founding director of the International Institute of Science Diplomacy and Sustainability at UCSI University in Kuala Lumpur, and joint chairman of Malaysian Industry Government Group on High Technology. He is a former science advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia, former member of the Scientific Advisory Board to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and former director of the Institute of Advanced Studies of the United Nations University in Tokyo. Professor Sakri is also the founding chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and a founding member of the International Network on Government Science Advice. Thank you very much, Professor Sakri. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe when some of you was attending the first day of our conference here, I related to how I morphed into a science diplomat by accident. I was a happy academic at the university 30 years ago. During the negotiation of the UN Biodiversity Treaty in Nairobi from 1990 to 1992, I was co-opted as a science advisor to my delegation. And it was a very strange environment for me to be sitting with the seasoned diplomats. In fact, at the end of the first day of the negotiation, I plucked enough courage to speak to my head of delegation, the Malaysian ambassador, a lady, and I told her, Madam Ambassador, I think I want to go home. She looked at me, amused like you now, and then seemed to be a bit upset. She said, why? I came from the university. I came here and you guys were meeting in the plenary for half an hour, then you adjourned for 2.5 hours in the delegates' lounge. It's a waste of time to me. The ambassador looked at me and smiled, and she said, Professor, why don't you give yourself another 1 week? That was 30 years ago. I never looked back. The life of a science diplomat is so exciting. You know why? Those guys who sat in the delegates' lounge for 2 to 3 hours, that is where horses were traded, deals were made, and when they come back to plenary, it's just to gavel the word yes. Secondly, Chair, I think it is very important, science diplomacy today. You mentioned just now about the different categories of the actors. What we are really pressing on today, Chair, is really helping solve pressing global problems: climate change, biodiversity loss, microplastic pollution, and some others. There's on the downside. On the high side, maybe the use of AI, space economy, advanced technologies. So in that context, in terms of priority, I think it's to train negotiators who are participating in treaty ongoings. Of course, climate change is one of them, yeah? And here, for people like me then 30 years ago, I was lost. Negotiators, who set the agenda? These are thinkers from the industrialized West, the so-called global North. They set up the draft, and we in particular from developing countries are just taking in and see how you react. Most probably is against our interests. But even then, we don't even realize the implications, So this is the gap. You mentioned about the gap, the significance of the issues at hand, like climate change. It was started since the Industrial Revolution, and it was started by the industrialized countries. And they were the big contributors of the greenhouse gases. And yet the whole world, in particular the global South, needs to react. And the negative impact of climate change is saddled by those in the global South. Just take the big flood in Pakistan about 3 years ago. The amount of damage is in the billions of dollars. And a poor country like Pakistan can't afford that. And as you were saying, just about climate finance is very critical. It's very critical, and we have to contribute to that, in particular, the rich countries. Secondly, I am also a believer that we have to collaborate together, the North and the South. That's one of the reasons when I was co-chairing the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment with Sir Robert Watson from 2001 to 2005, and also as the founding chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IBES. This is a dialogue, a global dialogue. So although we are at the receiving end, I always believe that we need to sit together in the same room. And I hope one of the lessons that we could get from this workshop today is this need for international collaboration, the understanding, I still got 4 minutes, yeah?
Yes.
What else? All right. And also, one is the negotiators. The second one is the scientists themselves. Brilliant scientists, okay? And they're the best. But sometimes the scientists couldn't develop the right narrative to elicit constructive responses from the political leaders. Because in the end, Chair, what needs to happen is the political commitment of our political leaders. When the UN first convened its International Conference on the Human Environment in Oslo, I think in 1972, only one head of state attended beside the Prime Minister of the country, and that is Indira Gandhi. And today you look at COP 28, 29, 30, hundreds of prime ministers, presidents who attended. That's good, that's good. And this is where the role of the scientists and the expert in science diplomacy could leverage and advise them. So that first, have the political commitment. Secondly, develop the infrastructure where we have a good cadre of people who can call themselves science diplomat. But it needs to happen. This is where I think the so-called science policy nexus, science policy interface needs to happen. The scientists would interact with the policymakers or even the politician. And finally, I think, Chair, it's so necessary of organization that you just mentioned just now. One is the International Science Council, where many of us are fellows, but also the likes of the World Academy of Sciences in Trieste. They're doing a good job, and there are many more. So, Chair, I can go on and on. Finally, I think in terms of what are the kind of things we should do, would be short courses, introductory course on science diplomacy for 3 days, or even 2 weeks, or even master's course. You mentioned about having one. And in our institute, we have already introduced a master's in science diplomacy. And it was quite electrifying to see these students who just realized that this is one area which the scientists or the young diplomats could contribute to world peace and human well-being. All right? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor, also for the view, I would say, from the Asian side. And now we move to the more, I would say, side from America and Central America to Mr. Franklin Morales. He is the head of International Technical Cooperation of Panama's National Secretariat for Science, Technology and Innovation. I will just shortly present Mr. Morales. He is also an accomplished professional with an extensive expertise in international cooperation and critical and emerging technologies. And he is also spearheading the development of Panama's artificial intelligence strategy, positioning the country at the forefront of AI governance and adoption in the region. Previously, he held prominent positions in diplomacy and development. As Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Panama in Washington, D.C., he identified opportunities and led the historic collaboration between Panama and the United States. So very actuality now, this topic as well. And he advanced agreements in strategic sectors such as pharmaceutical and advanced technologies. Earlier, as political affairs officers, he coordinated national international security matters with US government agencies. He was part of the global talent management team as well. So he in the private sector at Electrolux AB in Stockholm, in Sweden, where he developed international strategies for human capital. And beyond his professional roles, he founded the Indigo Youth Leadership Community, a nonprofit equipping youth with 21st century skills and expanding social capital. He holds a degree in international public policy from Johns Hopkins and an executive certificate in economic development from Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you very much, Mr. Morales, for being present today. And now I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It's for me a great pleasure to be here with you today. I feel there are so many experts in the room that it's difficult to know what to say. So let me perhaps, beyond what was said, give you a bit of background. Like, I'm a diplomat. I've been a diplomat in Washington. I was in Washington for 10 years. I saw, for Panama, public science diplomacy is very important. As you know, we are in the news today for reasons we would not like to be in the news, but it showcases how our country depends on the international community and international support for advancing our interest. A couple of days ago, I heard Kim Montgomery actually saying something that it resonated a lot with me in terms of science diplomacy. Science diplomacy, as I understand it, is about advancing the national interest with science. For me, that makes science diplomats pretty much every diplomat. It's not only the diplomat working on scientific and technology issues, is how every diplomat is using data to advance the national interest. And that's, so I come from a perspective where my country launched, was one of the first countries in the region to launch a science diplomacy strategy back in 2018. So I saw the implementation of that strategy as a diplomat. So it's for me, it's a very practical question. How do we get this done? And I think, and I'll try to frame this intervention in a few points. One is diversity, then mission, then tempo, and then thrust. What do I mean by diversity? Diplomacy is not monolithic. It's like multilateral diplomacy is completely different to bilateral diplomacy, and that's something we need to understand. So we need to start from that point. The institution, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is trying to advance the national interest through its diplomats, but it's a completely different agenda, the way it's advanced in a relationship with a country, like my country with the United States, for example, or in a relationship with an agency such as the United Nations. So first, I think it's important to understand that, because the requirements in terms of what a diplomat or a scientist need to do in both those contexts is completely different. And the tempos are completely different, and the requirements are completely different. So that's I think one of the reflections I would bring. When we talk about science diplomacy, particularly for issues like bilateral diplomacy, one of the challenges is the tempo of and the different tempos of science and diplomacy. Diplomacy requires response in a day, in 2 days. We need to know now something. We need a response, and we need to articulate that response in the simplest way possible. And it's evolving. We're constantly trying to define, okay, how, for this particular audience, how can I adapt a message that actually gets me to the next point in the conversations? So whenever we reach back to our institutions and our countries, the information needs to be there already. So science doesn't have the time to go back and look for the answer that we're asking for. It has to be there already. Now, in terms of context and the diversity, we're also talking about countries that have a deep system of institutions building this science, and other countries that are building these institutions as they go. We have the countries that have the large bureaucracies, and then you have the countries that are smaller, the countries that are in developing countries, that their bureaucracies are not so large. And I speak from my experience in particularly engaging with the United States, when I would usually, I would often call it, I would say to my colleagues, we're gonna meet the football team, because it's usually like 2 or 3 diplomats on this side, and then like 16 diplomats on the other side, right? And on the other side, you have scientists, technical experts, you have all these people that work inside government institutions. They are experts and scientists that work inside government. But when you're in a developing country, many times those experts are not inside a government institution. They are separate in the system. And that brings other challenges. It brings, which was one of the points I wanted to talk about, which is trust. When you are inside an institution, a governmental institution, it's a given that you trust the other institution. The Department of State asks the Department of Energy for input, comes back, it's government, it's expertise from the Department of Energy, I can execute on that information. If I don't have the scientists inside the bureaucracy, then there is a trust issue as well that we need to bridge. Like if I'm a diplomat in Washington, I don't share information outside of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with people that I don't know. They will keep that information secure and safe. So if you're a scientist trying to work with me, I'm not sure I want to tell you what I'm working on, because I'm not sure if you want to go to the media and say that you're the cool scientist working with the embassy in Washington to do X, Y, Z. So it's a very, very practical challenge. How do we build the structures for building trust between the diplomatic system and and the scientific system when they are not closely linked or when they are not embedded in government. And the challenge there is that we cannot always embed it just because of fiscal capacity and other things. But that's one of the challenges that I would say. In terms of tempo, I think, as I say, I think the challenge is how do we build a national agenda, research agenda, that considers the national interest long term. What should we be researching that doesn't change with a government, doesn't change with, is because it's a foundational thing of how the state works. And if we can build that research agenda, then the scientific apparatus can start thinking of what are the products, what is the way I can interpret this information, and I can go to government officials and others to express the value that science has. The diplomat, because he's in a fast-paced environment, I would argue he will not turn back and say, "Science, please help me. We don't have time." So science needs to be proactive in saying, "Hey, I know you're working on this. This is the way we can interact." And then it's also like, how do we create a mechanism for fast communication between each other? When I think of particularly like training, what do we need specifically? I think it depends a lot on the mission of the institution. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a very specific mission: advance the interests, defend the interests of the country, and that takes certain skills, certain capabilities that diplomats need to have. Mainly understanding high level the science. What's happening? What are the new technologies? How can I understand enough so that I can look back at where I'm standing, whether it's a multilateral or bilateral setting, and be able to identify opportunities? That's what I need to know, because once I identify the opportunity, then I'll bring the scientist. But if I don't even understand the science, I cannot know what looks like a good opportunity for engagement. And that's from the Minister of Foreign Affairs perspective, is how do we train those individuals that speak both languages? It's a completely different language. It's a completely different way of working. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for the discussion. But in general, I also wanted to recognize Panama is very supportive of the work of the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. They've been working with us and working with the region, particularly with Latin American region, to building capacity and having more diplomats understanding the science, more scientists understanding diplomacy, and also working on real cases, real scenarios where we can exchange information. In the end, I think this has to be a co-developed process. I think scientists need to see how their science is translated into diplomacy. I'm a firm believer that scientists need to, even like simulation settings, saying, hey, if I provide you all of this data, how will that data look in what you do as a diplomat? And you will realize it's a one sentence thing in my speech. That's it. So if you're a scientist and you understand that, then probably you'll also know how to cater that information. And then for me, it has been a fantastic experience to be in the Secretariat of Science and Technology, because I've been able to interact closer with the scientists themselves and just seeing that it's a completely different ethos, it's just a completely different way of seeing the world. Just a week ago, I was stuck with a scientist for a week in Italy, and it was fantastic because we would constantly have arguments about diplomacy and science. But it's, again, diplomacy is about controlling information. Science is about sharing information. And we need to find that balance between, okay, how do we get these two individuals, one that wants to share everything and collaborate with everyone, and the other individual that says, hold on, it's not so safe to talk to everyone and share with everyone and find ways to collaborate. Anyways, I'll leave it at that, but thank you. Many ideas on this issue. Thank you so much again for the invitation to be here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morales, for this insight also from the diplomatic side. And now I move to Minya Pham, who has both experience in also diplomacy and also in the research field. Minya Pham is in charge of international development and strategy at the CNRS Foundation and CNRS Europe and International Department since last September. Before, she served as Science and Technology Counselor at the French Embassy in London and during 4 years, and as well at the French Embassy in the United States in Washington, so a big experience also from the diplomatic side. She was appointed Vice President for International Relations at the University Paris Sciences et Lettres, and was delegate for international relations at the Paris Tech Engineering School Group. She led the Department of European and International Relations at CNRS, and in previous positions, she also contributed to several European programs, like ERANET China for CNRS, as just one example. She headed an ENRR laboratory where, and over for 20 years, she carried out research on the impact of GMOs and pesticides on bee behavior. And she published more than 100 scientific articles and contributed to 5 books and supervised the work of 16 PhD students. So you see she has a big background also in the academic area. In this role, she coordinated a European scientific program and acted as an expert for academic bodies, ministries, and the European Commission. She contributed as well to the creation of a startup in the UK, and she has a PhD from Sorbonne University and a state thesis in neuroscience. I can go on and on, it's so impressive, her CV. So the last I wanted to add is she holds a degree in agricultural engineering and is Emeritus Research Director at the CNRS. So thank you very much, Binya, very impressed, and now we are looking forward to your experience and your thoughts about the needs for science diplomacy training.
Thank you, Martina. Well, it means only that I'm very old. So what I would like to say, well, we are in France, so I guess that quite a lot of participants will not be surprised by what I will say, because I was asked to talk about our institutions and the, science diplomacy in our institutions and in our country. And interestingly, we will be 2 from France, 1 from the diplomatic side, and myself more on the scientific side. So I think it will be very complementary. So thank you for the organizers for this panel. And well, to start, I would like to say that France's science diplomacy strategy was formally outlined in one report, which has been produced in 2013. It's still active and robust, despite the fact that we need some update. And I think there were a lot of updates along these last 10 years. And today, I think it's really at stake to revise the strategy in the French science diplomacy. And I know that our ministries, the Ministry of European and Foreign Affairs, on one side, in collaboration with the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, are working together to produce new reports on the matter. Basically, the science diplomacy strategy is not very original. The core objectives are to boost economic competitiveness, to promote soft diplomacy, to address global societal challenges, and to facilitate research collaboration and strengthen national R&D capacity. France has a wide range of tools. I heard that from Africa, for instance, you don't have so many science attachés. France is very lucky to have a wide range in embassies, a wide network of scientific and technological counselors and attachés, less counselors than in the past. So some of us have been through these positions. and also a network of overseas research organizations, institutions, and a lot of bilateral and multilateral funding schemes. So we are quite lucky in terms of the tools that we have in France and abroad. From my personal experience, what I would like to say is that I have observed the system first as a researcher, as you said, also as the head of European and international relations for French research organization or universities, and then finally as a diplomat abroad. My point was that from my position as a researcher, I have been exposed to some diplomatic issues when I was cooperating, but basically the scientists, as you said, they work together when they have complementarity in their topics. They don't always care about sovereignty issues or even IP, I mean, intellectual property. They just need to have a partner wherever he comes from. Then as the head of European and international relations in different institutions, I started to realize that it's not only a direct connection, but it's also a real work. It's a job. I mean, there are rules, and you cannot do exactly what you want as a scientist. And then, as a diplomat, I thought that it was really interesting to understand how France's higher education and research system was seen not only among us, because of course we understand each other, we know all the layers that we have in France, but from above, I was interested to see how another country, how our partners actually see us, and how do we promote our own system when we are out of France. So that was something that I really learned as a science diplomat when I was in different embassies. Okay, so also what I have seen from the diplomatic network where I was is that the dialogue between scientific institution and diplomatic representation is hampered by a lack of mutual understanding. You mentioned it very clearly. Diplomats have a geopolitical, I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to understand how it works. Diplomats have a geopolitical vision and give priority to economic impact rather than scientific impact. And they not always see the underlying science in global issues such as climate change, pandemics, or AI. Conversely, the researchers see scientific complementarity, as I said, with partner first and foremost, without sometimes considering issues of sovereignty and intellectual property. Therefore, there is a need, and this is the aim of this panel and this session, for the creation of a common ground. So, if I may suggest some recommendation to bridging the gap between scientific expertise and policy making. Of course, many countries are facing this challenge, this gap between scientific expertise and policy making or diplomatic issues, but it's particularly pronounced in France from what I can see. And we need to strengthen, and I think the diplomats are fully aware of that, to strengthen the scientific expertise without the diplomatic ranks. That would improve engagement in scientific issue and enhance France's credibility also. The Diplomatic and Consular Academy that you will probably talk about is a step forward, but we still need more efforts. And we have example, best practices in the US and the UK, for instance, by placing scientists in governmental agencies for a fixed period of time, and this will help policy decisions. And such programs offer a practical way of bridging the gap without requiring permanent structural changes. Conversely, on the other side, better preparation could be provided to scientists who are holding representative positions abroad. We could refer to the recommendations that have been already mentioned of the EU science diplomacy working groups who aimed at building a framework for European science diplomacy. And I have 2 points that sounds very nice to me and important to me, is developing communities of talent in science diplomacy by identifying upstream personalities with skills in this field and creating a talent pool and database to optimize recruitment, offering also career path to scientists wishing to move into diplomacy, sometimes in the other side, other way around, possibly, and providing incentives as in the, for instance, AAAS fellowship programs. A second suggestion for me, which seems to be very important, is to promote interactive dialogue between scientists and diplomats by organizing intercultural sessions, summer schools, training program, whatever, for scientists and diplomats, also mixing people from different countries, European countries at least, and also identifying mediators, honest brokers, to facilitate communication. There are a lot of communication issues there, and also involving the European delegates or agencies where they are. I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minja, as well for your contribution and also your call for dialogue and for strengthening the possibilities to interact and to develop communities between scientists and diplomats. Yes, and now we turn to our last speaker of the panel. It's Pascal Roos. Pascal Roos is now working at the new French Diplomatic Academy and Consular Academy that has just been founded or started in February. He holds a PhD in Management and Science from the engineering school École des Mines de Paris. And he's then actually the head of the research department of this new Diplomatic and Consular Academy that is part of the Foreign Ministry, different than our academy that is outside of the Foreign Ministry. He has served as diplomat in Turkey, as political advisor on Syria, as cooperation advisor as well in the Embassy of France to Ethiopia and to Iraq, and has overseen budgetary management for cultural cooperation and official development assistance in the headquarters of the French Foreign Ministry here in Paris. And he started his professional career as a professor in the French higher education system. So also there a bridge, I would say a good link, a bridge, I would say, between diplomacy and research. So thank you very much, Pascal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share some comments and analysis on these very important topics of science diplomacy, which is a very important issue within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France. I will talk as a practitioner of science diplomacy, because as you said, I used to be a counselor for cooperation, and on this position I had the chance also to work to develop the cooperation with Ethiopia, with Iraq, in the field of science and in the field of university cooperation. And I will talk also as today the head of the research department of the academic the diplomacy, which has been established a few months ago, and whose mission is especially to try to develop the skills of the diplomats, especially in the field of science, but not only, of course, because we have a lot of different skills to be developed as a diplomat in order to allow them to be as good negotiators as possible. But science is a real concern, and we are now in the process of trying to identify the best way to inject the scientific knowledge and the scientific culture within the diplomatic community at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So as the question which is to be addressed today is the training needs, I will refer to the context of actions, because the needs will be different according to the actions we are referring to. And on this regard, I thought that the typology which is proposed in the last report, which was released by the European Commission, and that you mentioned earlier, is very relevant, as it is identifying three different action contexts. The first one is science in diplomacy. The second is diplomacy for science, and the last one is science for diplomacy. So I will just elaborate a little bit on these different context actions, and I will maybe mention some of the thoughts and maybe some of the trials that we are experiencing now at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the first one is science in diplomacy, which refers to the scientific and technological component of the many geopolitical issues. I would just mention, of course, artificial intelligence, climate transition, but also nuclear proliferation. So we have a lot of global issues which are based on very strong technological or scientific backgrounds. And it's not possible for a diplomat to negotiate on some specific issues if they don't have the minimum knowledge or the minimum assets in terms of technological knowledge. So of course, diplomats are not experts. They are able to negotiate on a wide range of topics, so they just need the proper level of knowledge just in order to really understand the challenges associated with all the different options, technical and scientific options. So at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, we do not have in the bargaining team, we do not have experts, scientific experts, but we have to make sure that all the diplomats have the right access to the right scientists or to the right people who have this technical knowledge. So on this regard, when it comes to science in diplomacy, the challenge is to try to develop and to equip the diplomats with the scientific culture and to connect them with the scientific community in order to just allow them to be able to negotiate on the right basis. So this is one, I think, the first training needs, just to keep the capacity of the diplomat, which is very important in the end to be sure that we reach the goal and the objective of the negotiation, but to be sure that we take into consideration all the technological and scientific assets and backgrounds of the negotiation. So this is one of the first needs that we can identify when it comes to this specific context of action, the science in diplomacy. And this is becoming more and more important, especially because all of these topics are considered as a source of power by most countries today. And for example, the capacity to be able to master some technology are a big source of power for some countries. So it's becoming more and more important for the diplomats to be able to be at the top of the knowledge on these issues. But again, as we do not recruit scientists to be diplomats, but we recruit people who have a very strong academic background, but they are experts in international relations, and they have not a PhD degree, for example. Most of the French diplomats do not have a PhD degree, so they don't have this academic background. So it's a long way to try to develop this culture, and it has been also very well mentioned by the precedent speaker, and this is a very big challenge. The second context of action, which I mentioned, is diplomacy for science. It refers to the necessity to develop the cooperation between scientists, and it refers also to the idea that science is the common and the public good, which has to be developed and to be shared. And we know that this conception is not completely shared today, and some countries do think that there is no need to share or to develop and to share the scientific knowledge, because also this is something which maybe is a bit contradictory to the diplomatic objectives and to the way they consider the international relations. And on this regard, as it was also very well described by my colleague, we have the chance in France to have a very wide network of scientific attachés, which means that we have several hundreds of scientists which are posted in our embassies worldwide and working very closely with the diplomats. They are members of the diplomatic staff, but they are recruited because they have this strong academic and scientific background. So we are facing exactly the challenges which were very well described by my colleague. On one side, we have the diplomats who do not have the right codes when it comes to understanding how a scientist is thinking, the professional cultures of diplomats and scientists are very different. So we need to, the need in this regard is to develop the scientific culture of the diplomats, but at the same time, the scientists themselves have also to be trained, and they need to better understand what are the diplomatic rules, the specific timing also, as was very well mentioned also by our colleague, the specific timing of the negotiating and the diplomatic activity, when we need sometimes to go very fast and very quickly, and we cannot just wait 1 week or 2 weeks to have the global report with all the details. So this is something also which is very important, and we need to focus our training efforts towards diplomats and at the same time towards scientists. Both need to be addressed at the same time. And the third, I will come now to the third context of action, which is science for diplomacy, and which is related to the necessity for diplomats, not only on scientific or technological topics, to engage a stronger dialogue with scientists. And when I mention scientists, it's not only mathematics, chemistry, but it's also human and social sciences. Why this dialogue is important? Because when it comes to diplomacy, one of the main activities of diplomats is to try to set up some negotiating strategies, which means with which countries we need to develop relations, on which topics, which kind of cooperation we need to develop. And for this, in order to set up these type of strategies, we need to also to be fed by all the knowledge which is created by scientists. And for example, on some specific geographies, it's sometimes difficult to get access to some very necessary knowledge, and we really need the knowledge of the scientists. And for this reason, it's very important to develop a permanent dialogue and constant dialogue with the scientists in order to feed the analysis, which will allow the ministry then to set up some strategies. And again, we are facing the difficulties related to the difference in terms of professional cultures. And then we need to address the specific needs for diplomats on one side and for scientists on the other side. And this is exactly what we are trying to do. In my position, I'm trying to develop the confidence. It was also mentioned earlier in the intervention, the confidence and the mutual understanding between the two communities. And it takes time, and we need also to find the proper way of engaging the dialogue. It's not only the usual way of training people, it's building strong relations in the long term, and we need also to be very creative on this regards and to find new ways of engaging the dialogue. So this was the contribution to the topics and to the question raised today of the training needs. But again, I think we really need, if we want to be efficient on this regards, we need to question the context of action, because we will have different needs according to the different contexts, and then we will maybe be in position to address more efficiently the question of the training of the different actors. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Pascal Rose, for your intervention as well, and also your insight of your program that you are setting up in the new Diplomatic and Consular Academy in the field of training of science diplomats. And yeah, I can only agree with all the other speakers. I think there was a call and an agreement between all of them to increase the capacity building, the knowledge of diplomats in science and of scientists in diplomacy, and to, yes, train them more, be it 2 weeks or 2 days training, as has been mentioned, and is happening already. It's really interesting to see all the parts of the globe are interested in this subject, are doing something. Some have not yet signed diplomats in their embassies. They will catch up, I'm sure. And of course, do you interact with your national scientists, or do you interact internationally? Also, this was interesting. You have partnerships with all African countries. Here I see more in France, it's more between French scientists and French diplomats, but we also in Europe plan to set up this European framework, so we will have an interaction regionally with European diplomats and scientists. So I think there's a lot of work ahead and still needed. But before I do my own conclusion, I would like to give the floor to the public, to the participants in the room, and also maybe if there are questions online, of course, then as well. Maybe you can introduce shortly who you are before you start with your question, and also say if you have a specific question to one of the members of the panel. Thank you. Please.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. First of all, I want to say, wow, you know, the last hour, what we heard from the panel is mind-boggling, because with every speaker, there are several questions. So I have no idea how to actually handle that. My name is Nazar Hassan. I'm with UNESCO Beirut office. I do policy and basic science in terms of capacity building. And of course, hydrology and biodiversity comes with the package for the region. I'm only responsible for the Levant countries, which are Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. Which should I pick and what to leave behind? They're all important. But I know I need to give my colleagues in the room some opportunities as well. First of all, my first take is on the side of developing countries. In terms of developing countries, I think there is a huge difficulty for science diplomacy to strive. You know, I'm from Sudan, okay, that's one. And the way things are handled with the authority there is not kosher. For example, Professor Zachary mentioned negotiation. Imagine that the Ministry of Environment, for example, in developing countries, is not given the importance as a ministry with capacity, with budget and stuff like that. So how are they going to actually contribute to the negotiation when they go to the COPs if they are not really well capacitated? So I see a problem for science diplomacy to strive in developing countries. And on the other side, we have some good models in the West that we can actually look at, and that actually would point out to what our great hero from Panama has mentioned, Mr. Morales, is how do you trust scientists that are not part of your governmental institution? And I've seen a lot of parliaments, like in the UK and other European countries, they have an office for science and technology within the parliament. And maybe for MOFAs to actually to be able to have a similar office to patch that gap might be. So I'm asking, is that something that would work? And on the other side, coming to the more developed countries, where is the ethics part of the training needs that would kick in? You have national interests versus international. And of course, diplomats and their scientists, they come focusing on their national interest, of the national interest of their countries. How is it that you align that with the common good for the rest of the world? Again, Professor Zachary mentioned that you go to the negotiation and the draft is actually done with developed countries already, and it's thrown out in your face to agree. I stop here. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you very much for these good questions. And in fact, this, yes, might be contradictions as well that come up then with training of diplomats, be it national or in an international environment. Yes, who would like to answer? Yes, I pass maybe first the floor to you and then to Mr. Morales. And oh, would you like to say something? Yes, please, Dr. Biotang. To you, please.
Ben, thank you very much for that. I think it was a lot of issues, but I think that's why we're here, you know, because of the diverse needs, you know, in different countries, even globally. How do we catch up? So one of the things we need to do is that we must develop specialized training programs, you know, in different areas, depending on the needs of the people. I think that's what, you know, I would say. For example, Africa, like I said, 54 countries, they have very different needs. South Africa are way ahead of maybe Sudan. But I will also say, how do we create leverage on our networks? How do we work together? How do we create such platforms? So this shouldn't be just the beginning, but it should be the end. It should be a continuous, you know, And then we also need to promote, you know, awareness raising and capacity building, as you said, for scientists, for diplomats, for policymakers. But the people I don't see in this room, maybe they are, is the industries who also use that. So we should bring all together. You know, we talk as scientists, we talk as diplomats, we talk as policy, but the industry people, they have the kitty, and also the parliamentarians. I don't see any parliamentarian here. So we should bring everybody together, you know, and I think this is the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. I think you're making our life complicated. I think we need to start with simple things. The thing that needs to happen maybe today is this notion of connecting the expert or the scientists with the policymakers or the political leaders, the so-called science policy nexus. That needs to happen, and it can happen here. Of course, Sudan is quite a challenging country. I watched on TV last night, they were still walking the street with guns and all that. But there are many countries in the developing South who are quite ready to engage in this conversation. And there's also a great sense of camaraderie from colleagues from the global North who are willing to interact with the rest of the world. I think we should start from simple things that we can do. And from my experience also, eventually you would have to involve a whole of nation approach where the private sector is also involved beside the scientists, academician, and the politician. Okay?
Thank you very much. I pass the floor to Mr. Moraes. Yes, please.
Yeah, I like to put things into one word. Like so the way I understand your question is three things. What are the structures we need? What about demand? Who needs this information? And then the third one is, I'll go into it. The first one is, I think we need to be smart. Is like not everything needs to be in-house in the country. There are institutions like IAI, there are other institutions that are building knowledge around issues that are of interest to our countries. And we can actually partner, we can pool those resources. We don't need to build all the capacity in-house. And that's something that we need to be smart about as developing countries. What capacity do we need in-house? What capacity can we get from partners? And what capacities can we get from the international community? On demand, diplomacy has been around for hundreds of years, right? Science as we know it, like modern science, is not so long that we are using the scientific method and all these things. So this is a very old profession being intervened by a recent development technically, right? So we can continue doing the old things the old way. We didn't perceive the need for a new thing into the old way we do things. So I think science needs to understand that in the sense that it will need to be a bit of a push more than a pull situation. Science needs to contextualize the information and approach diplomacy and say, hey, this is the value. But to do that, science needs to understand that it's national interest that diplomats are trying to advance. If you come to me and you say, hey, I have data on climate that is very important. Okay, I hear you, but how is that important to what I'm trying to advance as a Minister of Foreign Affairs? Oh, because this is going to affect economic growth long term, and if you don't address this thing, this is going to impact like this. Okay, now I hear you. Now that data is important, and now I'm going to embed it. So I think we need also to, and it's part of the training needs, right? Like how do scientists understand what diplomats are doing so that they can contextualize information in a way that is useful? And the final one, I would say it's a bit of a I perceive it as a false dichotomy. I think the global good is the national interest. I don't think it's two different things. We all breathe air, we need clean air. It's in the national interest that we have clean air. It's in the national interest that we don't have migration flows caused by climate change. It's in the national interest that we take care of space and continue to be able to explore outer space. It's in the national interest that, that we don't have a pandemic going on. So I think it's just how we frame it, but the global good is the national interest. So I don't think there should be tension between those two things.
Thank you very much.
If I may,
Yes, Ed.
sorry, may
Yes.
I? Yes. Well, I picked this last point, the ethic, and well, you are quite optimistic. I'm a bit less optimistic. And I think there are still some cooperation versus competition when we go to national interest. And you are right when you say that pandemics or climate change cannot be considered only at the national level. I mean, we need to cooperate broadly. And we see the impact of the withdrawal of big countries like the US from the Paris Agreement, for instance. And we did not yet measure the impact that will be tremendously great. And I think that these common goods are above national interests. And I think we really need to prioritize what we wish for the future of our children. And I think it's a bit above what we are discussing today.
Thank you very much. Pascal.
Thank you. If I may, I would add a little bit also on the comment regarding the national interest and the competition. We have to admit that, of course, we do share, France, I mean, the vision that the common goods are of national interest, and we are working very hard on this regards and to try to build also coalitions at international levels. But we have also to admit at the same time that this is not the common and widely shared position by all the countries all around the world. And so we have also to admit that scientific knowledge is also a source of competition, and we have to some extent some countries which are not ready to share on very fair basis the same conception. So we have to take this into consideration, because I think we will miss an important point if we consider that science is something which is widely shared and there is no political dimension behind the scientific knowledge. Actually, each country has its own national strategy, which can be very cooperative. And as France, we are, I think, one of the leading countries in terms of cooperation worldwide at the international level. But at the same time, we have to be careful not to be naive. And we need also to understand that the way we are mobilizing the scientific knowledge will help us maybe to be stronger in face of some countries which are not as cooperative as we are. So we need, I think, to take this into consideration and to avoid the global and view on the general and mutual interest, which is not objectively very always shared by some countries.
We have some diverse views on the panel, but in general, I see we are coming to a topic that has not been mentioned at the initial intervention. That was this tension between collaboration and competition also in the area. There are several interventions, so please keep short, because we also have some online, and we have, in fact, 6 minutes left. So please be short in your questions. I start there with Paul Bergman, please. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's truly remarkable that UNESCO is convening a global ministerial dialogue on science diplomacy. I don't know whether there's anybody else in the room that was at Wilton Park in 2009, but at that meeting, the discussion was for foreign ministries. The discussion brought together many different governments thinking about science diplomacy, introducing it, and this trifecta of components. What is science diplomacy, for diplomacy and science? And it emerged from that discussion, largely because there was an interest to bring science into foreign ministries and to engage the foreign ministries in that discussion. It related to what is science diplomacy. I'm a science diplomat, and I certainly am not part of a government. I brought together the first formal dialogue between NATO and Russia regarding security in the Arctic. I had to go through the entire NATO-Russia Council to do that, to have that type of dialogue. It was an agenda that was set not by a government. It was set outside of a government. So the question that I would pose to the panel, you've all expressed the view of science diplomacy within foreign ministries. we live in a far more complex world. Nations bumped into each other in the 20th century. We created international with League of Nations and the United Nations. In the 21st century, international isn't sufficient. I would argue the sufficiency comes at subnational levels. So we have a spectrum of jurisdictions from subnational to national to international. The question is, do you really believe that science diplomacy and science diplomats are solely the purview of foreign ministries? Or do you think that science diplomats can emerge more nascently throughout the society and contribute to dialogues, even set agendas in ways that create stability, if not peace, in the world? Take Panama right now. We have United States, a big, heavy hand of United States across the world, and Panama's in the sights. How do you as a country, or how do we as a world address when nations become aberrant? How do we create the type of continuity that will traverse the 21st century into the 22nd century if we're only thinking in terms of national interests? So it goes to the question in terms of a balance between national interests and common interests on a planetary scale. So a question in terms of your discussion, viewing science diplomacy and science diplomats within the remit of nations. I would argue it's much broader than that, that individuals throughout society can serve in the role as diplomats with scientific backgrounds and broker dialogues among allies and adversaries. So I would welcome your response.
Thank you very much, Paul. I would like to pass the floor to Dr.
I agree
Professor
with
Sakri.
Paul. The notion that diplomacy, science diplomacy, is the purview of just the foreign ministry is not current anymore. And the problems that we are trying to solve are multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral. And many moments, the leaders or the spokesman of each country would be the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. But all the same, from my observation, the role of the conventional, traditional diplomat at the foreign ministry is good. And in fact, sometimes they should lead. And one good example of that is Brazil, where the spokesperson is the ambassador, who is very articulate in his expression. And technical people like me will be sitting in the second row, whispering to his or her ears. Secondly, Chair, this national interest, global interest, is also a moot question. It's always going to be a global challenge, but the implications reverberate at the national or regional level. This is where science diplomacy should be in real action. Do you know the definition of a diplomat? One English diplomat once said, a diplomat is a person sent by his country abroad to lie. So that's the national interest that we're saying. But in terms of science diplomacy is getting a convergence of view. Finally, Chair, while I still have the floor, I think good example of science diplomacy is the IPCC or the IBES. These are expert or scientific body which interact with the negotiators of the respective treaties. Hence, you got the Paris Accord in 2015, or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in 2022. So we are somewhere there. We don't have to start from square one. And I also want to express the initiative by the European Union in leading this process, Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sakri. I would not agree with your colleague who mentioned that diplomats are liars. They can maybe pack nicely unpleasant news. That is what I would rather say diplomats are good for. But yes, I would like to pass the floor also to Dr. Boateng.
Thank you very much. But I think science diplomacy also has to border on core values, values of integrity, values of cooperation in fairness, values of empathy, and the value of respect. You know, we need these values to really move science diplomacy. For example, you know, where is the respect for one another in terms of even the environment? Where are the indigenous knowledge systems that we should respect? I mean, so science diplomacy for us in Africa means a lot. And that's why I'm saying it is anchored in our next 10-year plan, you know, so that how do we leverage on science diplomacy to move the Africa agenda that we want? And again, you know, keenly in terms of science diplomacy, how do we mobilize the NGOs? You know, we're not talking about NGOs, but the NGOs are the grassroots. Science diplomacy has to go down right to the grassroots in terms of negotiations. So again, that's why I say we must develop specialized training programs depending on the needs of the countries. But I think we should also leverage international networks. You know, the African Academy of Sciences, the IAP, you know, IPCC, IBES, all the other, you know, international organizations. And how do we influence those organizations? And also UNESCO now has given us the platform. How do we continue this conversation? And EU, I'm proud that they have now come up with a framework. EU has science diplomacy framework, but this was started by Royal Society many years ago, and the AAAS many years ago. And, you know, so it's all coming. So there's now a movement, just like we had open science movement, let's now create a movement for science diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, I would like to pass the floor, yes, to Mina and then to Mr. Farage.
Just a word about the fact that science diplomacy can exist out of the institutions or the structures. And I personally rely on the people on the ground, especially the diasporas. We have a lot of scientists from our countries everywhere in the world. And instead of considering them as lost scientists who are serving other countries, we should, as a government or a ministry, maybe take advantage of, not all, but some of these people who would like to be our ambassador in the country where they are, not bringing them back, but asking them to help us wherever they are, to maybe contribute to the influence of our country and also help them in some crisis where they need to have our help, and encourage them to keep the ties with their mother country.
Very short, please.
Yes, I think your question is very good and difficult to answer, actually. I'm not even going to pretend that I know exactly the answer, but I just wanted to say I think it's a matter of agency, right? Like who has agency? I agree that pretty much all of society, and something that was commented 2 days ago is the power that other non-state actors have in today's world. We have to recognize that. Maybe because I'm in this world, I still believe governments have a role to play. Even it's always about influencing up to the point that then governments decide to do something, right? So the governments have a role to play, but it doesn't need to start with the government. That's one thing. And the other thing I wanted just to clarify is at least when I think of something like national interest, I don't think of what a politician defines as a national interest. I think more philosophically of the national interest as an idea. The national interest of a state is to preserve itself, to survive, to protect its people. I don't see how one can preserve that national interest without preserving the world, without preserving the ecosystems, without preserving, our global health. So that doesn't mean that we may have governments and people that go against their national interest. They are going against what I perceive is their national interest, but I think in the end, it's the national interest to preserve these global goods. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't mean the political agenda of a particular government.
Let's And now, Pascal.
A very short comment on the importance also to take into consideration the action of the sub-ministries level. And of course, we do know and we do invest also the relation with the NGOs, with the independent actors, but also with the other ministries. It has not been said so far, but of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not working alone in its own track. For example, on the climate change negotiations, we are dealing with all the other ministries involved in these topics. So it's a huge network actually. So we don't need also to only focus on diplomacy as a technical ministry, but we have to consider all the network included within the public action with all the ministries involved, of course.
Thank you very much. Now we are already over the time, but I saw that there are still some questions and also questions online. So what I suggest is that I take all the questions, and I would ask one or several panelists to reply very shortly, if possible, so that we can also still have a little break before the next session. So I pass first the floor maybe to Dr. Ranges if we have questions from online.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do. We have 130 people joining us online. It's even more than are here in the room. And they have many questions. We definitely cannot address all of them. I just read out one of the questions that relates to the discussion we just had, coming from Dennis Norton, a former Minister for the Environment in Ireland. And I quote, he says, "Practical science diplomacy holds immense potential to overcome today's geopolitical blockages, but it requires the involvement of politicians and political commitment. Could the panel please share their insights on how to incorporate decision makers into the science diplomacy training process?"
Questions so that we reply maybe all together, then if there are some. Yes, please.
Yes, very quickly. Well, this has been a fantastic session, really. My quick question, there are many questions, but one of them is about the ethos, because you mentioned, Franklin, something that is, we know it very well, that scientists have their ethos, we have our ethos, and diplomats have their ethos, and I think politicians have their own ethos. But, actually reminded us that what is important are that are core values, no? So, but what happens with the scientists when they become part of the diplomatic environment? What happens with the ethos? That would be my question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm from IRD. So I would have a lot of things to say about how we do research and maybe how we can promote collaborative research with southern countries when we're from northern countries, because I think that could also help narrow the gap in negotiating position when we do research together, and then maybe at some point it could also help narrow the gap in negotiating position. But my question would be more on the language we speak, because you all insisted on the fact that diplomats and scientists don't speak the same language, and we really focus on the how can we narrow the way we speak to better understand each other, and on the training needs about, for instance, we could think about how to write a policy paper. That could be one very short step to help narrow the language, but the question is still the when. When do we speak to one another, and when is a good time to release a paper, when is a good time to speak to a diplomat, and vice versa. And the question of the when is actually quite important as well, because at the end of the day, it probably narrows down to the question of trust. which is to install a regular dialogue between the one who are negotiating and the one who are researching, to be simple in the terms. And the question of trust sometimes can also link to the question of impact, because what we sometimes hear about scientists and about diplomats is the time that it's not worth speaking to scientists, it's not worth speaking to diplomats, we don't have time, our job is to focus on research, and vice versa, our job is to focus on negotiations. And so the question is, how can we deliver messages that science diplomacy bears results for both sides, and at the end of the day, it still comes down to impact in some ways. I would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, last question, because we have to stop if we have to reply still to these questions as well.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Marcelo Hira. I work at the IAI. My question to the panel, especially to Franklin, my colleague here from Panama, is in building up on the previous discussion, a lot of emphasis has been given to foreign policy and diplomats, training science diplomacy for diplomats. But as was discussed before, national governments have many policymakers. Key institutions like secretaries and ministries of science, technology, ministries of the environment addressing UNFCCC, conventions, negotiations. So what is also the need, the role in science diplomacy, not only training, but practice, including a broader range of policymakers? Policymakers work in those ministries that are setting up science, technology, innovation policies, environmental policies. They are negotiating on behalf of their countries, setting up agreements, bilateral, multilateral. So it's a broader spectrum in the practice of science diplomacy to engage in collaborations in science, technology, environmental issues that are global common goods. So I'd like the panel to address that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to take maybe the first and the last question together, how to cooperate, make sure that decision-making is really incorporated in the science diplomacy, and linked it as well. It's a broader theme, not only foreign ministers, but a much broader range of decision-makers involved. So that is the first question. The second is ethics. Scientists, part of science diplomacy, but what happens to the ethos, as mentioned, and the third one, research, how can we make sure that they speak the same language? So who would like to reply? One, maybe, yes, short reply.
I'll try to be as quick as I can.
Thank you.
Decision makers, I think with the decision makers is pretty much, if incorporating is what the value that they get. In the end, decision makers, politicians, they have an agenda, they have what to achieve. You're not going to convince them to achieve something different that they want to achieve. You actually have to convince them that the information you have is useful for what they want to achieve. I think that's one of the things I believe is important. And as a diplomat, something we constantly do is understand what the interests of the other. It's not so important what I want, it's important what the other wants. And I think that's also the thinking that needs to go into science diplomacy. What does the decision maker want, and how can I meet that decision? That's the way I would incorporate it. With regards to the ethos, I think scientists need to be scientists, right? Like in the end, it's like, I think there is a beauty in a scientist from Israel talking to a scientist in Palestine. There is a beautiful thing in a scientist from US talking to one in China. And that should continue, because that's very important to sustain what we want to sustain, which is world peace, communication, diplomacy is that, right? Like understanding among nations. I think when they come into the diplomatic world, it's just one aspect, but then the diplomacy also needs to serve the science, right? And that's another aspect. We haven't talked too much about that, how diplomacy serves the science, how the scientist identifies opportunities for the science, and then the diplomacy helps. And I don't think that needs to change. I don't think it's just about the specific mission of the foreign ministries of foreign affairs that I'm talking about, but I don't think the ethos needs to change writ large. And the last question.
We'll leave this for another panelist to reply.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Minya, thank you.
Yeah, mainly on the second question about ethos, I think it's not only a matter of dialogue, but it's really an intercultural gap. I mean, scientists can speak from Israel and Palestine very easily because they have the same way of thinking. And same for the diplomats, they know how to negotiate even if it's different countries. Now, when it comes in the same country between scientists and diplomats, then comes the problem, because the diplomats, don't take it as a criticism, have a spread, a large, broad view of the different questions, but not on the very deep way, when the scientists have a very narrow spectrum of interest, but they dig very profound. So it's quite difficult for them to talk together. Now, if you talk of scientists being in a diplomatic network, then they have to understand they are not doing anymore their work of scientists. They have to understand that they are now doing some outreach about science, and not only their own science. They have also to understand that their own science has to be put in a broader let's say, consideration. And this is not very easy because we are highly specialized as scientists, more and more. And it's very difficult, even when we have to put our own science in a broader environment. It's also difficult for us for physicists to talk with people from social science or whatever. So these are borders. We have to break the silos wherever we are talking about. So the silos are very resistant to so that's the main problem.
Thank you very much, Minya. Really, we are over time, really. I'm so sorry that I cannot give the floor to more. Maybe the closing remarks now for Pascal.
Thank you so much. Very shortly, I will just address the third question related to when and how to develop the dialogue. I think important to have a permanent dialogue with different intensity, but not to wait the time of the crisis, because when you are not used to discussing with other people, with scientists and diplomats, then it's not, when the time of the crisis is not very relevant to develop this dialogue. So I think it's important to have a minimum level of dialogue, specifically on some issues which are long-lasting, just like climate change or now artificial intelligence. So we need to focus on some specific and the most sensitive issues, but to develop a minimum level of dialogue so that when we have the crisis, you already have the connection, and then you are moving faster in the mutual understanding. And then maybe another interesting way is to develop, I'm talking specifically for France, to develop the recruitment of PhD holders, because as I said earlier, most of the diplomats have an international relation academic background, but not a PhD background, and it will be I think of interest to develop the mutual understanding, and then this is maybe something we will try to push forward in the future.